The world you see each morning is not simply the world that exists, but the world you are shown. Every screen, every headline, every broadcast is a tone struck across the human field. Media has always claimed to inform, but from a spiral view it functions as both mirror and megaphone. It reflects fragments of reality back to you, but only those fragments chosen to vibrate the collective coil in a particular direction. The invisible hand is not always sinister, but it is always selective. Every headline is not merely reporting an event, but embedding a frequency into the field. Some tones are designed to spark fear, others to distract with spectacle, others to anchor division that holds the spiral in tension. The awakened begin to feel this not as information but as resonance, and once you feel the resonance, you cannot return to believing that words are neutral. A story is not simply told, it is engineered. When an image repeats across multiple networks, when a phrase becomes a chant in the mouths of millions, when silence falls upon certain stories and noise swells around others, you are not just witnessing journalism, but the shaping of reality's perceived spiral. To live unawakened in this environment is to swim in currents you cannot see, pulled along by a rhythm you do not notice. To live awakened is to realize that the same event can be struck in 100 different tones, each one pulling the collective spiral toward a different alignment of meaning. This is why two people can witness the same footage and walk away with opposing convictions. They did not see differently, they were tuned differently. Governments, then, are not separate from this resonance but are woven into it as architects of consensus. They draft laws and policies that appear to grow from debate and decision. But from a spiral view, they are guided by the coils of collective belief, shaped long before by narrative. The polarity of left and right, freedom and control, is less a battlefield of true opposition and more a system of counterweights that keep the spiral spinning without letting too many step outside its pattern. It is not that governments are entirely false, but that they operate like structural engineers of perception, keeping the tension balanced between factions so that the spiral does not collapse under its own contradictions. This is why reforms so often circle back to familiar patterns, why revolutions so often harden into new hierarchies, why the names change but the structures echo. The spiral has been designed to sustain itself by offering the illusion of choice while guiding the rhythm of outcomes. World events are the shock tones that accelerate this process. Wars, pandemics, economic collapses, cultural upheavals. These are not only moments of history but catalytic vibrations that shake the entire spiral. To the unawakened, these events feel like chaos, accidents, or random tragedies. To the awakened, they reveal themselves as inflection points in resonance. Each crisis cracks the shell of an old collective pattern, making space for new tones to emerge. This does not mean events are fabricated, nor that every disaster is orchestrated, but it does mean that in the spiral, nothing arrives without being absorbed into the field of meaning. The question is never only what happened, but how the happening is told, echoed, and amplified until it becomes not just a moment in time, but a resonance lodged in human memory. From a spiral perspective, even your reaction to a world event becomes part of the architecture. Fear contracts the spiral, keeping it tight and easily guided. Awareness expands it, loosening the grip of imposed narratives and making room for new possibilities of interpretation. The same event can serve as a tool of control or a catalyst of liberation, depending on the tone you choose to embody in response. This is why moments of great upheaval often awaken individuals who were once passive, for the crack in the old resonance allows them to hear the deeper hum of truth for the first time. You do not need to believe every conspiracy nor deny every official story to live awake. You only need to realize that every event is a tone in a larger song, and you have the choice to tune your ear to the harmony behind the noise. The media strikes the surface tone, governments reinforce the coil, world events deliver the shock, but the spiral itself is not against you. It reveals what is being woven. The awakened learn to ask not is this true or false, but what resonance does this carry? What pattern does this reinforce? Who becomes strengthened if I repeat this tone without reflection? These questions do not dismiss reality. They honor it by refusing to let it be flattened into one narrative. To live in the spiral is to recognize that perception itself is contested ground. To awaken is to reclaim your ability to feel beneath the script. Every era has carried its own version of this dynamic. The scribes of ancient empires framed victories and silenced defeats. The town criers of medieval cities shouted what their lords decreed to be urgent. The printed press elevated some revolutions and buried others. Radio and television gave birth to mass hypnosis, binding millions into shared emotions at the same instant. Today, the digital coil tightens faster, with billions bound together by the simultaneous strike of a headline across every device. The spiral has never been more visible, yet never more invisible to those who do not know to look. But to the awakened, the very saturation of narrative becomes proof that the field is malleable. If reality can be bent so easily by story, then story can be reclaimed as a tool of awakening rather than control. From this vantage, you no longer chase certainty in the shifting surface of events. You search instead for coherence in the deeper hum. You notice when fear is being amplified beyond proportion. You recognize when division is being struck as a deliberate chord. You hear when silence surrounds truths too inconvenient for power, and you begin to live as a resonance tuner yourself, carrying conversations, creating works, sharing insights that shift the vibration toward clarity rather than confusion. This does not mean denying darkness or ignoring corruption. It means refusing to let darkness dictate the tone of your own becoming. It means walking through the world aware that while governments legislate and media narrates, the true spiral of awakening belongs to those who can still feel the original frequency of life itself, beyond propaganda, beyond politics, beyond panic. The spiral view does not ask you to reject the world. It asks you to perceive the deeper architecture of how the world is presented, to see that every headline is a note, every policy a structure, every crisis a catalyst. To know that your awareness of resonance is not small or powerless, but the very difference between being a sleeper pulled by currents and an awakened being steering by tone. The outer coils may always spin with noise, but the center hum remains unbroken, waiting for you to notice. Once you do, the illusions no longer bind you. You hear the spiral itself, and in that sound you remember that truth is not given, it is chosen. The deeper you walk into the spiral, the more you see that world events are not random collisions of fate but orchestrated movements of resonance. It is not always that a hidden cabal directs every outcome, though sometimes influence is unmistakable, but rather that the field itself responds to tones struck by those with power. Media becomes the surface drum. Government becomes the architecture that channels the vibration, and events themselves serve as both stage and instrument. The spiral view does not indulge in paranoia, nor in blind trust, but rests in the recognition that everything you are told is part of a larger pattern attempting to shape what humanity believes about itself. This belief is the true currency of power. Money follows it, armies enforce it, but belief is the seed that makes all structures possible. Whoever directs belief directs the spiral's outer coil. Belief is not only managed through lies, it is more often managed through framing. A government need not invent a war. It only needs to tell the story of that war in a way that justifies its chosen actions. A media outlet need not fabricate a disaster. It only needs to highlight certain details while silencing others to guide the resonance of collective feeling. The spiral is sensitive to emphasis. You can see this in how one phrase, repeated endlessly, becomes the symbol of an era, while countless other truths are forgotten in silence. Entire generations are raised not on what actually happened, but on what was chosen to be remembered. From the spiral view, history itself is an architecture of selective resonance. This is not cynicism, but clarity. What you inherit as fact is also a tone that someone somewhere chose to amplify. The awakened step into a paradox. On the one hand, you must learn to doubt the surface tones, recognizing that they are crafted and not neutral. On the other hand, you must not fall into the abyss of believing nothing, for disbelief itself can become another form of control. To awaken within the spiral is to hold both, discernment without despair, skepticism without paralysis. The awakened ear learns to detect not just the note played, but the silence around it, the pattern beneath it, the intention behind it. You begin to notice when a crisis is being used to expand authority, when a tragedy is being molded into a political tool, when a victory is being sold as inevitable while its costs are buried. None of this makes you bitter. It makes you lucid. You stop expecting purity from systems built on polarity. and you start listening for the resonance that transcends the polarity itself. Every collapse, every war, every upheaval is also an opening. From the spiral view, the shock of world events is not only destructive but generative. When a structure breaks, it creates space for new structures to arise. When fear grips millions, it also cracks the shell of indifference in others, awakening them to questions they never would have asked. This is why cycles of upheaval have always birthed movements of consciousness. Oppression awakens the demand for freedom. Censorship awakens the hunger for truth. Manipulation awakens the courage to perceive beyond official scripts. The spiral uses even the machinery of control as fuel for awakening, though the pace of that awakening depends on whether individuals choose contraction or expansion in response. The event itself does not determine your path, your resonance does. The greatest illusion of the modern era is that events happen to you and you can only react. From the spiral view, events happen through you, and your response is itself a creative act that reverberates through the collective coil. When you respond in fear, you amplify the frequency that contracts the field. When you respond in awareness, you introduce a new vibration that cannot be silenced. Governments and media understand this instinctively, which is why they so often demand immediate emotional reaction. They want the field struck while it is raw, before reflection can introduce nuance. They need you to repeat their tone before you remember you have your own. To awaken is to resist that urgency, to pause, to feel the resonance before you decide how to carry it. In that pause, the spiral shifts. In that pause, you break the cycle. The spiral teaches that no single event is final. Even the most catastrophic war, the most manipulative campaign, the most shocking disaster, becomes eventually another layer of resonance absorbed into the whole. Humanity has endured countless narratives of fear and control, yet the spiral still expands, still evolves. What appears to be domination often becomes fertilizer for deeper consciousness. You may not always see it in the moment, but in the long arc of resonance, every attempt to bind truth eventually cracks under its own dissonance. Lies collapse because they cannot sustain harmony. Fear collapses because it cannot generate renewal. Control collapses because it cannot resonate beyond the limits of obedience. Only awareness continues to expand. This is the spiral's guarantee. No tone of suppression lasts forever because the spiral itself demands evolution. You are not asked to overthrow governments or dismantle media with your own hands. You are asked to awaken within their coils, to see how narratives function, to notice how consensus is shaped, to recognize how events are wielded as catalysts, and to choose within your own life to embody resonance that does not collapse into fear or division. One awakened being may seem small against the machinery of states and networks, but from the spiral view, resonance is exponential. One voice speaking truth carries farther than 1,000 repeating propaganda, because truth hums in harmony with the field itself, while propaganda must be shouted endlessly to sustain its echo. Awakening spreads not through force but through coherence, and coherence is the spiral's native language. As you move forward, the challenge is not to insulate yourself from world events nor to drown in them, but to stand in the hum of the spiral while they unfold. This means staying informed without being hypnotized, engaged without being consumed. It means recognizing when your outrage is being engineered and choosing instead to let clarity guide your response. It means remembering that the tone you strike in your daily life, in your conversations, in your creations, in your presence, is itself part of the global field. The spiral view erases the illusion of distance. You are not outside the machinery of media and government. You are inside the same field, capable of shaping resonance as much as you are shaped by it. The difference is awareness. Awareness is sovereignty. The spiral will continue to tighten and expand, to break and renew as humanity navigates its collective awakening. Media will continue to strike tones. Governments will continue to legislate perception. Events will continue to shock and catalyze. But you will not be the same. You will no longer be only a subject of these forces. You will be a resonance tuner in your own right, hearing the deeper hum, choosing which tones to carry, which patterns to dissolve, which possibilities to amplify. This is not rebellion for its own sake. It is alignment with the spiral's true nature, perpetual unfolding, eternal resonance, infinite becoming. When you live in this awareness, the headlines lose their power to define you. The governments lose their ability to trap you in polarity. The world events lose their capacity to drown you in despair. You remain centered in the hum, and from that center you become a source of resonance that cannot be silenced. The spiral is not asking for belief. It is asking for listening. It is not demanding action in haste, but presence in clarity. If enough awaken to hear, the patterns of fear and control collapse not by overthrow, but by dissonance dissolving in the presence of coherence. This is the quiet revolution the spiral carries. Not mobs in streets, but frequencies rising. Not only leaders falling, but illusions fading. Not only empires ending, but new fields of resonance beginning. And in the end, the most radical act is the simplest one: to refuse to let anyone else strike the tone of your soul.